Today is week 6 of our class, Communicating Science to Solve Tough Challenges. Last time we defined, so today we're talking about jargon. Last time we talked about sociology of science is basically zooming in on the human aspects on the individual and social level of performing science. We reviewed a real world example of analyzing the social context in which science happens. I was at a Starbucks. Today I'm not at a Starbucks, thankfully. I'm at my office. So hopefully it should be less scattered. We talked about questions that sociology of science can be used to answer, and we discussed the ways in which introspecting on science as a human activity can help scientists work in a better, less toxic system. So today we're going to talk about jargon, and I hope this works. I can open this on YouTube and then share that screen.
But be understood by someone who doesn't have the expertise you have. And I'll just give you an example. I want you to tell me if you know what this is. It's a deformable rubber element with a tubular handle, usually made of wood, used to apply increased atmospheric pressure upon an obstruction within a domestic waste outlet line. Now that's something that comes from general engineering and physics, but do you know what that is?
It's rubber. It's used in something. I lost you right after. It was made of
Okay,
rubber.
I'll say
I was
it one
thinking
more
like a
time. Here we go.
plunger or maybe.
There you go. Yeah, a
It was a
plunger.
plunger.
A plunger.
Well, that
Yeah,
is a lot of jargon.
try this one. It's a barrel-shaped instrument from which an anti-friction spheroid projection extrudes, enabling a point of contact for transfer of a viscous colored fluid to a surface.
Watercolor. Point of paint. A pen. I hope that example showed you a little bit about jargon and the role of jargon. It can make things very complex that are not complex, like a pen. We all know what a pen is. We use pens every day, but if you explain it the way he did, we would have no idea what a simple pen is. So, all right, so let's move on to, I'm glad we got that to work. Okay, so when scientists use jargon, they often do so because everyone else does. They do so because there's certain ways that everyone talks about science in the field, even if it's hard to understand as an outsider, and it makes the research inaccessible to the general public. So, so sometimes it's good to have jargon. In general, try to avoid jargon as much as possible. Sometimes it's not possible to avoid jargon, so you want to use the least amount of jargon needed. You can skip jargon sometimes when it's not. Oh, this is my slide from the University of Minnesota Communications Forum, and I forgot to change the bottom part, but that's okay. You can't always totally omit jargon, but you can reduce it. So Steph Powley, who wrote for the Fancy Comma blog, wrote some tips to reduce jargon, and here are some of the tips. One of the tips is explain the jargon the first time you mention it. Yes, this includes spelling out all acronyms unless they're more well-known than what they stand for, like DNA. Make all jargon serve a purpose. If it doesn't absolutely need to be included, omit it. Write using active verbs and avoid using passive voice because that makes it harder to understand because in passive voice, there's no subject, so you never know who's doing what. Explain things in the simplest terms without losing clarity. No need to say occlusive phenomena when you can just say blocked. And don't be condescending. Like, you're the one using all this jargon. Don't make people feel stupid if you do need to use jargon. How can someone understand something if you don't help them understand? So here's a jargon-free approach to SciComm. And this kind of has you kind of build out your jargon. So like you have some jargon you have to include. So then you figure out what that is. Then you just try to explain that without any jargon. If you have to use more jargon to explain what that one jargon is, take a step back and try to figure out if there's an easier way to explain it. And you can also use things like metaphors and similes, two forms of figurative language, those can be a great way to explain jargon. So a metaphor, we're just going to review this quickly because I feel like you guys know you all know what metaphors are. A metaphor is a figure of speech that compares two unrelated things, most usually by stating that one thing is another. So for example, that exam was a cakewalk. Obviously, an exam is not a real cakewalk. A literal cakewalk is like a walk on which you get a cake, I think. An example of metaphor by Shakespeare, all the world's a stage and all the men and women were merely players. Obviously, we're not all in a production of something. As much as I think I am in one sometimes, I am not literally like cast in a play. I'm just living my life. But that's the metaphor, is like Shakespeare, he always writes plays, so he just sees everyone as being in a play. So we actually do use common metaphors in science. CRISPR gene editing, we have a cut and paste. It's a cut and paste kind of thing where you have scissors to cut parts of one gene to another one. Then we have DNA, which are the building blocks of life or the genetic blueprint. So a simile compares one thing to another. An example of a simile, he was as busy as a bee. Other examples of similes, the atom is like a tiny solar system, I guess, because I found that one on Google, but I think like it's the Bohr model has like the nucleus and the proton, then you have the electron kind of like revolving around it in the Bohr model. So I think that's pretty fun. So there's also analogies. A simile is saying something is like something else. A metaphor is often poetically saying something is something else. An analogy is saying something is like something else to make some sort of an exploratory point. So those are three things. There's similes, metaphors, analogies. There's others. There's many literary devices. I'm a writer, so I also tutor writing. So I know there's a ton of different ones, and a lot of times as science communicators, we use this without knowing exactly what they are. And I think that's what makes us feel like we're not good at writing, because we don't have humanities training, but we write a lot. So what does it take to de-jargonify your work? A desire to communicate more clearly, the ability to connect new knowledge with what you already know, a creative mind, and practice. So here are some tips to simplify complex topics to improve audience engagement. Tell a story, use models like the hero's journey, in which a hero goes basically on a voyage to do something and sort of changes in the process and something new is discovered. There's all kinds of hero's journeys like in movies. But therefore, limit jargon, use metaphors, similes, and analogies, use the concept of ELI 5, explain it to me like I'm 5 years old, or root your lesson in something outside of science, society, policy, pop culture, news, etc. So that's all we had for today's lecture. So let me stop recording and we can discuss.